Our first item on the agenda today is consider a referral from Chief Young for our AFG grant submission.
Right. This grant is the Assistance to Firefighters grant, and it's a little complicated. They open their window, and it's a 4 to 5 week window to write the grant, to submit it. So this grant is due before council. So I guess with council, your committee approval, we'd submit it. We always have the choice to turn it down if council weren't to approve it. So I think in the future, I think at the beginning of the year, maybe look for permission to write it whenever it opens up. We have no warning when it is going to open it up. Normally it opens up in October, and due to the government shutdown and a new system and all that, it didn't open up until February 3rd. So what this grant is for, it's for 40 portable radios, 2 charging stations, and 35 waterproof mics. It would replace our existing portable radios that are non-structural firefighting compatible. So they'd be P25 compliant. Those radios are for public safety. They meet the digital requirements for public safety portable radios. The grant request is for $165,728. It's a 95-5 split, so the city's portion would be $7,891, which we included in the 2020 budget to cover if we were awarded the grant. So the grant is written, it's ready to be submitted, but it is due by March 13th, just to be upfront about it. There is no reoccurring costs. It's a one-time grant request. And we do this annually for AFG. We pick up an area we want to try to replace. But it's always like a 4 or 5 week window, and it's almost impossible to make that time frame to get it to committee, to get it to council before the application period ends. So I think next year in January, we just seek permission to write it. But for this request, it's for the 40 portable radios.
All right. So anyone have any questions for Scott?
And I don't have a problem with it. The numbers are different, I think, on our sheet here. If I was following along what you were reading.
Good.
Just so we have the right numbers, that's all.
Okay, what is the sheet for?
You said about $7,200 in the sheet that says $8,200?
Yeah. And the total to start with.
Yeah, right.
There's not much of a difference, but just so we got the right numbers.
$10,000 is $10,000.
Well, we wrote this up, and then Todd I'm not writing the grant, I'm working on accreditation. The grant is for $165,728, so it's a little more. The city's portion is 5%, $7,891, and that's actually less than what we have on the request. So
it's less than on here, I know,
yeah.
just so we got the right numbers.
So you want to change that, and Tim could get the right numbers?
Yeah, the application is for, Tim, $165,728, with the city's portion being $7,891.
7,000 what? 800? 7,891?
Yes. I have the grant right here. I printed it off. And then when we wrote this, the grant wasn't completed yet because it's so time sensitive too, and it's quite lengthy. It's a very
When is it due,
in-depth.
anyway?
What's that?
When is it due?
March 13th. And it opened on February 3rd.
Yeah, it's just before council.
Any other questions?
So just repeat the motion, just so we get it.
I'll move to accept the request.
With the grant amount
Yeah.
of,
$165,728 with the city's portion not to exceed $7,891.
okay.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any other further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, ayes have it. Item number 3 is consider a referral from Chief Young to waive ambulance bills for end-of-life patients whose bills are denied.
All right, this request is, we went to a private ambulance firm in August of 2018, and patients from the hospital that require transport, what I'm talking about is hospice patients. in the hospital require us to take them to a hospice center or maybe even return them home. What happens is occasionally it's strictly Medicaid, Medicare. They may not be enrolled in a hospice program, and occasionally they'll look at the patient. They could have gone by other means. They could have went by private vehicle. And when we go up to a room, we're just there to transport the patients on the doctor's orders. So occasionally when A&B bills Medicare, Medicaid, it could be denied, and it's a handful of calls a year due to medical necessity. Then they'll appeal the decision, and when it's denied again, they go to the client hold list after 120 days. And technically, we should be taking them to collections. A lot of times the patient is deceased or is dead, and then we're going after money from the family. I think it's a practice that I'm not really comfortable with. I think these patients deserve better. And I do not like taking somebody that should have been enrolled in hospice, and we transported them prior to being accepted into hospice, and then taking them to collections. I would ask that we can have A&B just keep those patients off the client hold list, and we don't take them to collections.
Questions for Chief? I don't have a problem with this. I will make a motion to consider the referral from Chief Young to waive ambulance bills for patients whose bills are denied by the insurances.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and second. Is there any other further discussion on this item? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Item number 4 is consider a recommendation from statewide services to deny a claim to Mr. Cadena for damages loss of his personal property.
Right, this is pretty much standard practice of when, someone files a claim against the city, we submit it to our insurance company, they investigate, and if they find that the city's not at fault or not liable for the claim, then they recommend that we deny the claim. And all that basically does is that just shortens the statutory limitations to 6 months in which the person can pursue further legal action against the city. It does not dismiss the claim. It just shortens that to 6 months as where the claimant must take some form of legal action.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on this item? I'll make a motion to accept the recommendation from statewide services to deny claim to Mr. Cadena.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and second. Is there any other further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Item number 5, Tim, let's do the same thing.
Yep, exactly the same.
So item number 5 was consider a recommendation from statewide services to deny a claim from Mr. Simonson to damage to his vehicles. I'll make a motion to accept the recommendation from statewide services to deny a claim to Mr. Simonson for damage to his vehicle.
Second.
We have motion and second. Is there any other further discussion on this item? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Number 6 is consider a request to increase construction service contract with MSA for the East Riverbank Phase 2 project by $12,500. Joe?
Sure. So there should be a Finance Committee request in your packet. It lists, and if you didn't get a chance to read it, I'll go through it. If you did, I'll keep it brief. Let me know what your preference is.
I looked through it, but we got 2 fill-ins for the
Okay.
committee tonight.
So there were a number of areas that MSA is seeking additional compensation for in the East Riverbank project. Some settlement behind the river wall, that was a change order that the city approved, and some additional construction inspection administration services for that work for $3,431. Restoration of Phase 1 improvements integrated into the Phase 2 project, including the construction, inspection, and administration, primarily focused on the results from some of the multiple high water events and erosion just south of the Grand Avenue Bridge. That is $4,607.50. Number 3 is a review of an additional ramp on the backside of the balcony Correspondence and drafting time to review options for the ramp are $527. Plan preparation for adding trees to the parks after the storm damaged vegetation in the park for $692. The added wall cap installation, inspection, and administration in the Mead Rapids View Park for mounting the new railing on the wall, $1,080. And storm sewer redesign, inspection, and administration to field fit conditions in coordination with old abandoned sanitary sewer and buried wall foundations for $2,162.50 for a total of $12,500. The next page includes staff recommendations. So staff has reviewed the request. Dan is here from MSA to discuss that request as well. Staff has had several discussions with MSA, and staff's recommendations are as follows. The settlement behind the river wall, number 1, for that $3,431. Staff recommends to pay the full amount as this was associated with a contractor change order and out of scope. Number 2, the restoration of Phase 1 improvements integrated in the Phase 2 project, including construction, inspection, and administration for $4,607.50. Staff recommends to pay 50%, or $2,303.75. The city understands that this is in part due to the contractor, but also understands that there are many inefficiencies in administering the contract requirements effectively. Number 3 is a review of the additional ramp on the back side of the balcony, correspondence and drafting time for $527. The city did ask if it would make sense to provide a narrow ramp or sidewalk around the balcony for wheelchair access. Unbeknownst to the city, MSA developed a plan and profile sheet at an expense of $527. Because it wasn't a specific request for that type of detail, staff doesn't recommend any payment for that. For the plan preparation for adding trees to the parks after the storm damage for $692, the city did request that MSA developed a recommendation for tree planting after the July 20th storm event. MSA had stated or quoted that it would be $300, and therefore staff recommends a payment of $300. Number 5, the added wall cap, installation, inspection, and administration in the Mead Rapids View Park for mounting the new railing for $1,080. According to MSA, the original assumption was to install the wall cap on the existing stone wall. However, staff believes this was an error on the plans, as there's not a single location nor detail shown that identifies installing the railing on an existing stone wall without first installing the wall cap. And therefore, the staff's recommendation is no additional payment for that item. The storm sewer redesign, inspection, and administration of field fit conditions in coordination with the old abandoned sanitary sewer and buried wall foundations for $2,160.50. This effort saved the city additional contractor cost, and the staff is recommending paying the full amount. So of the total $12,500 requested, staff's recommending a payment of $8,197.25. And in conclusion, staff recommends amending the service contract with MSA from $151,365 to $159,562.25, which is an increase of $8,197.25.
Anyone have any questions for Joe?
No.
I would like to comment on some of the areas where I guess MSA's costs are different than the city's cost, if you guys would mind listening to some of the comments that I have. So all these costs are associated with getting the project done and getting it done right. And these are expenses that have been extensively documented by MSA, and I can provide the committee members the additional documentation if you guys want to review all the legit costs that we have in it. MSA is not asking for anything extra, just to cover the payroll cost that is associated with the individuals out there doing the inspection and doing the work. For item number 2, one of the comments regarding the 50% payment, these are all things that, MSA couldn't anticipate. The way the contract was written, certainly with the acts of God, the contractor believing that it's not their fault to come back out there and replace some of these areas. There was a lot of additional correspondence. There was areas that had to be improved with, that were wood mulch that got floated away down the stream that got replaced with rock mulch, so there were change order items that played a role in this. And trying to enforce, the contractor taking care of it, working kind of as the middleman between the city and what they're willing to help the contractor do, certainly added time to that. So I guess as far as, administering it inefficiently, I guess I would say that the 50% recommendation is an arbitrary value, and I'm only asking for the time that we had into that effort. The additional review of the backside of the balcony, this was something that, because of the complexity of the grading at the site, in order to give the city the knowledge to make a decision on whether that addition would be warranted as part of the project, there was the level of detail that we needed to give them an answer. Was there going to be a railing that was needed? The backside of the wall for the balcony, the retaining wall, that face isn't finished to actually be a presentable face. It's a rough finish. It wasn't smooth finished like you would see a normal retaining wall. So there are other details that played into, should this be something that is added to the project? And ultimately, it wasn't decided that it was added, but we still spent the time to formulate the facts to give to the city on that one. Similar to the trees, the $300 was a shot off the hip at a progress meeting. Once we did the $300 of work, we were asked to put 4 trees in one park. There was an addition that came back that ended up being 13 different trees in 2 different parks because of all the storm damage. So we ended up doing a second edition of the plan that wasn't accounted for in this $300, and I felt that we did it effectively and efficiently to give, once again, the city the facts and knowledge to make a decision on, should we go forward with those trees. We also worked with the contractor to develop a price. The price came back high. It was decided not to put those trees in, but while the area was tore up, this was information that the city needed in order to, should we move ahead with it or not move ahead with planting trees at this time. Similar to the wall cap, at the design, we could have went through all the testing in the world. The city could have spent more dollars than $1,000 in testing to see if that wall cap is suitable for anchoring into. Through the contractor working on the wall cap, found that, so we thought, because this is in the newer section of wall where it was tuck pointed, the rock was a limestone rock. It wasn't the river rock or the blasted rock that the rest of the wall is constructed of. It was very flat in surface. Felt that it could be drilled into to anchor the wall cap. The other complications in this area involve drainage, and so if we added an extra 8 inches to that wall cap, where's the water going to go that's behind the wall? So there were other factors that kind of played into what should we do with this area. The assumption was made that, okay, the railing even itself looked like it was suitable to simply add the square paneling in front of it. However, come to find out, when the contractor is drilling this stuff, the mortar was brittle, the rock was brittle, so in order to anchor in it, those anchors would have been pulling out. So this wall cap solution for this extra 175 feet wasn't added due to the fact that the assumptions were made up front without doing all this testing to figure out if it was suitable to anchor into. So, like I said, I have the documentation. If you question whether or not our costs are warranted, I'll give you a packet. It's right here. You guys can look at the hours that we pulled from our project management software to give to the city.
Can I take a look at your
Yeah, absolutely.
Joe, do you have anything?
Yeah, just for a quick follow-up. So, again, that restoration, because of the storm damage, our contract was a time and materials not to exceed, and there were a number of delays in that effort, and we just like the contractors expected to complete the project to the city's satisfaction in accordance with that contract. we expected that the engineer would do the same. And we still have those expectations of the contractor. They've asked for more, and the city so far has denied that. The administration to see it through is part of that original contract. So that's the staff's position on it, is it's already a contracted item. There may be some more costs associated with it, but because it's already a part of that contract, as staff, we don't feel that it's appropriate to pay more for it because it's already in the contract. The same thing with the backside of the balcony. Again, if staff had been informed that there was going to be additional cost, we would have liked to have seen that up front so that we could make a decision. We brought these types of requests to the council before, and staff's been scolded for it. So we want to make sure we're being upfront. Same thing with the adding for the trees to the parks, that $300 estimate. That's if there was going to be more cost to that. As staff, we really needed to know that, because a small amount of $300, staff was comfortable saying, you know what, let's move forward with that. If it was going to be more than that, we really needed to know before we could make a decision. So seeing that after the fact was an issue. And then that wall cap, again, there's not a single place on the plan that shows a detail of any railing going on any wall that doesn't have a new wall cap on it. It doesn't exist. Everywhere in the plans, it shows a wall cap on the wall. And so while I'm not saying that they didn't provide more service, and that service costs time and effort for the company to provide good service for the city, it's consistent with the plans that were submitted and consistent within scope of the project. And we did have a time and materials not to exceed for those contractual services. So I mean, we're happy with the work that MSA's performed. We're just as staff hesitant to approve some of the additional costs because they weren't detailed up front so that we could make those types of decisions.
In my opinion, we just got quite a bit of information from MSA, and I don't, on one hand, I want to do my due diligence to the taxpayers of the city and not just ram something through on one way, but on the other hand, I don't want a contractor that works with the city, I don't want to shortchange a business either. So in my opinion, what I would like to do is, with this supplemental information that was submitted by MSA, I would feel more comfortable for this to come back to another Property and Finance Committee meeting when committee members have had more time to review the information that was submitted by MSA. And in my opinion, I just would not feel comfortable taking action on it until we have more time to look over the information that MSA provided.
I mean, we came up with over $13,000 and cut our price back to $12,500 to show that we're doing our due diligence with the city on these costs. And we could throw everything under the sun and scope every hour on a not to exceed contract and to give ourselves twice the amount of time up front. But would it be reasonable to even approve our contract up front when we get these unforeseen things that happen during construction that nobody has a crystal ball to anticipate? I'm just asking for the city to be fair with our time and our expenses on the project.
Yeah, but if we have another disaster and it all goes to hell, then we gotta next year pay more.
The section that's already completed, so the phase one portion that needs to be restored will be restored by the contractor. There'll be some additional erosion control placed to help protect that area, and that'll happen after the spring thaw. As far as future maintenance, the city will have a 1-year warranty on the improvements that are out there, but future maintenance would be by city if there was extensive damage from future flooding that occurred.
Does anyone else have any other comments?
I guess the one thing I have to say, I'm not disputing, that you had cost time and materials into this, but I guess it really comes down to me as far as when you became aware of these costs, when were they communicated to the city? When were they authorized by the city? You have a cost, a contract administered, and you kind of have that flush out in the contract, but to me it comes to, and I think we kind of ran into this on the aquatic side, is that when you start going outside that scope of those services, or there's unanticipated stuff, I think it's upon you to be communicating that to the city, as opposed to on the back end of the project having these additional costs, so that the city can make an informed decision at the time of when you become aware of this stuff.
And we do our, through efficiency, try to fit things in. It's just at this point, there's so many small things that, we still have to wrap up the contract with the contractor yet, and all these small things are kind of eating at the time that we would need to. So we try to fit stuff in efficiently into the bulk of the hours that we have. Sometimes, I don't like to nickel and dime on projects like this, on small things. But we still need to finish the contract, and in order to actually bill for the time that we had, this is why the request is coming up. I mean,
Scott, Tom?
I'd be comfortable, I guess, tonight making a decision. I know what you're saying. I guess I've listened to the comments from the city side and MSA, but I'd be comfortable making a decision tonight. Was yours a motion to hold over?
I didn't make it
He
into a
just
motion,
made
I
a
just said
comment.
I'd feel
He just made
comfortable.
a comment.
I would then, I should have something to say first. I'll move that we go along with the revised figure of the city of 8197 and 25 cents. With the explanations that the city has provided. And have listened to the comments from the other side too.
Yeah, I think when you weigh what Tim has said, hearing about it at the end, plus we're paying for, I guess, I would just estimate it to be two-thirds of what they're billing us or wanting. So it's only 1/3 off. Yeah, and the other thing too, when the contractor develops a contract, I think most contractors put a cushion in, for those contingencies that could occur, because it's the unknown. And so I would kind of go along with what you're saying. What if we come back, are we going to go up 4,000? Or are we giving, we understanding, and we're not just saying none of any of these, we're saying 2/3 we're gonna pay, and so 1/3 we're not. And they go, I guess, I still like what Tim said, if we didn't know up front, then how do we, why should we pay at the end? So someone comes to your house and does construction, and after he leaves says, oh, by the way, I'm going to have an extra $1,000 on the bill. And you'll say, maybe I wouldn't have done it that way, or maybe that's not what we agreed to. When you're in the middle of construction on your home, you say, you'll need this, you'll need this, you'll need this, and now we'll ask you for another $1,000. I look at it in that scenario, in that metaphor. So I would agree with what you're saying. So it can be discussed at the common council meeting, and people could turn it down.
So yours a second then, I guess?
Yeah, I'll be a second.
I'll vote in line with the committee then, and as Alderperson Kellogg said, that this issue does have to go into the full council on the 17th, where it'll be decided by all 8 members at that time. This is only the first step in the process then.
And I would like to suggest that all the councilmen get a copy of this so they can review it before the common
Can I
council.
give this to you, Tim?
yeah, I mean, there was, some email correspondence that documented, asking for the additional things. And it's like going to a grocery store. If you buy a can of corn, you don't get a can of peas free. I mean, you still got to go through the checkout line. And they're not going to waive that expense.
Well, you can, at the common council, you can speak to your case, and if they have this information in front, maybe the common council will change it, so.
With that, we have a motion and second on the floor. Is there any other further discussion on this item? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Item number 7 is considered discussion regarding special assessments, looking into possible alternate methods of paying for public improvements. This item is related to special assessment notices residents receive when there's construction projects regarding sidewalk, curb, gutter, and roads. And how many people are here for that item tonight? Okay.
Can you explain what would happen if you got rid of the special assessments? I mean, like, we paid already $6,000 and I can't take it off our taxes. Would that maybe go into, maybe if you change that, we could use it on our tax write-offs?
Well, that's where, right now, this is kind of a new thing that's just being brought up. Actually, Alderperson Rayom started it a couple months ago. And what we're trying to do, what the thought is try to find a way to be fair and equitable to people that have already had special assessments in the past versus people that are going to get special assessments going forward. Before I go, Joe, do you have anything?
So I can provide. So this is a special assessment study draft that I asked staff to work on with me. And what we've done is because of this ask, we're trying to figure out exactly what the council's looking for. So we try to draft this up in a scope so that sorry if I sit down here. So that that expectations are met. And so what we're proposing is to review and summarize the current special assessment ordinance, along with other funding options available to the city, potentially in lieu of the current special assessment program. The scope of the study will compare and contrast options, including the current special assessment procedure, based on a variety of variables to weigh the pros and cons of each option. And then each option would be presented in a matrix format with a description of how the funding source works, along with a list of variables for comparison. Those variables can be graded or scored to try to provide some type of a at-a-glance summary of the different pros and cons of funding options. A preliminary list of variables may include equitability, implementation, administrative effort, public stakeholder support, uniqueness as a funding source, ramifications, financial and otherwise, revenue potential, cost to property owners, and a very preliminary list of funding sources might include a vehicle registration fee, pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes from the wastewater utility, transportation utilities, a separate utility, eliminating assessments and looking for a referendum to just put it on the property taxes and compare that to the existing special assessment program. The data for this would come from a variety of sources, such as staff, League of Wisconsin Municipalities, direct contact with other communities, professional organizations, a community survey, and the internet, with an intent of a deliverable that is a concise electronic report with attachment to all the resources. The draft table of contents would include an introduction and background with the scope of study, the existing special assessment program, that process, how it works, revenues, existing revenues, historical revenues, and projected future revenues, the various options, of which I've mentioned some. If there's others that you're interested in, we can add that to this. This is the draft. A comparison of each option, including the variables I previously mentioned. Staff recommendations on maybe making a determination, and then an appendix for resources. Once the scope is satisfactory to the council, Staff would then develop a timeline, and I've got a list of basically the staff involvement below. And we wanted to present this so that the committee and the council could review this and see if this really fits the scope of what the intent is. We believe it does. But this is going to be quite a bit of work before we dig into it, because some of these procedures are not procedures that we have in-depth knowledge about, so we're going to have to do quite a bit of research. And before we spend that staff time on that research, we just want to make sure that we're doing it wisely and the result is what the council wants to see as far as a deliverable report.
One question I often get a call from constituents on is whenever we have a construction project, people often ask, well, property taxes I currently pay, doesn't that cover the sidewalk and the road and the curb and the gutter? Could you answer that, Joe?
So the city's ordinances do describe the percentage of contribution from the city versus the percentage of contribution from assessments. I didn't bring that detail with me right now. I believe 60% of the cost of the road is paid for by the city taxpayers, and 40% is paid for by the adjacent property owners. Curb and gutter, I think, is 50%. I think it's 50% of the curb and gutter only. I don't think that includes the aggregate and grading underneath it. And sidewalks are at 100%.
And I know there's people here, so I just want to go around and...
Yeah, I'd like to, my name is Tim Zager, I'm representing Express Recycling. I went to the mailbox a couple weeks ago to find a couple envelopes in there from the engineering department and explaining to me that I would potentially receive my invoice for approximately $37,000. So I'd like it known to the people. I think what's happening in town here is you have little streets here and there that are being, you know, having these special assessments, and nobody ever really gets, not too many people get upset at one time. But if people knew that there's people in the community that are being asked to pay $10,000, $15,000 to have their street redone, and I understand it. Like I understand we all have to pitch in and help out in order to have the utilities in the streets that we use. But at the same time, these numbers are pretty extreme to expect a small business to absorb that kind of cost when we're already paying our property taxes for our business along with our residents.
Yeah.
I live in the city. I have, you know, multiple locations in the city, and then I have paid money to help fix up, I feel like, Smith Street and that side of town, and then I receive this in the mail after we're fighting to survive as a business, and then you receive this from the city, and it kind of feels like a real kick.
Sure. So, and Tim, do you know, and Mayor, maybe you know or recollect when you were mayor, how long has the current assessment procedure been part of the city ordinances?
Many years.
That doesn't mean that we should continue.
No, right.
What we used to do is, right after the first of the year, the committee would sit down and set a rate for paving, for curb and gutter, for sidewalk, for sanitary sewer, water main. Storm sewer was put in at no cost to the property owner. And those figures were based on the previous year's experience. And like sidewalk, the property owner that I can remember anyway never paid 100% of the cost of the sidewalk. And I mentioned that at some of the meetings we had already. Sidewalk is not on private property. Sidewalk is on street right away.
Do you recollect when that changed?
It had to change after 1996, or no, after 2002.
Okay. So, I guess one thing I'll mention with you, then that's why I'm sorry, Tim.
I was just going to say, I was just kind of pulled up the ordinance and stuff as far as the sidewalk is that a 50% credit may be granted if it's approved by, here it refers to the maintenance of way, which obviously needs to be, but there is something that might,
And I talked to Tim and I talked to the engineer.
Right.
And I asked them if they ever remember a case where the city paid 50%, where the city, just a minute. If they ever remembered where the city waived the cost of the sidewalk, 100% of the cost, or even 50% of the cost. And they both said they can't remember.
Sure.
well, I mean,
Well,
there's-
if they can't remember, why is it in an ordinance?
So I guess the point of the discussion is that, every single construction year, and for those of you that have been on the council for a long time, and especially in Public Works, you see it every year. Folks like you that have to experience an assessment are really upset about it.
Yeah.
And
I think if everybody had a special assessment the same time, you'd have the whole community in here.
well, so
But
if
we have little pockets here and there, and I understand it's the way construction works.
Well, and
But-
so what had happened is once upon a time, in order to keep taxes down in accordance with the council's wishes, if, the thought process is that someone that doesn't live on a particular street with a particular address doesn't necessarily benefit from that street being built. And so a percentage of the cost directly benefits the adjacent property owner, and so the adjacent property owner pays for part of the project. There are some municipalities that
But eventually all of the streets and all of the utilities have to be replaced across the whole city, right? Eventually.
And so what typically
So-
has happened over time is that municipalities, in effort to keep the property tax rate down, looks at different methods to do that. And historically, I've been involved in a number of municipalities that adjusted their special assessment process, and it usually goes to more assessment because they're trying to keep that tax rate down for a number of reasons. There's the expenditure restraint, the cost of construction goes up, but the state has levy caps, and so
But the tax rate isn't down. I mean, the tax rate is already high in Rapid.
so
I mean, I paid $4,500 in front of my house.
yeah, I'm not gonna
We're not,
divide, the tax rate versus what's paid, the tax rate doesn't tell the whole story, right? I mean, it's a tax rate's a cost per unit of value, and so if somewhere nearby your house costs twice as much, the tax rate's half, you pay the same amount, but your tax rate's half, right? So, but there's a number of reasons why the city council chose to develop an assessment program, and the reason for the referral and this draft for the study is to study that and to take a look at, again, every time we have an assessment hearing, folks from the project come and they're upset because they've got to pay something, and that's what this study is designed to do, is to evaluate what options there are. Because it costs money to do projects, right? So one of the options is the city just doesn't rebuild as many streets. Right now, it's been discussed a number of times at Public Works, but right now, we have 150 miles of streets. We're replacing just under a mile a year. If you do the basic math, that means our streets need to last 150 years, and they don't. And so right now, we're not replacing our streets at a sustainable pace. So, one option is to build fewer streets and just not spend as much so that we don't assess and that we don't ask for more in taxes. The other options are a number of different scenarios, right? And so the objective of this study is that if we've identified what the council wants us to research, we'll put together a report that describes how much the city generates in revenues from special assessments, what they've been, a list of recent projects and what typical property owners are paying for special assessments, and what some other methods might be, whether it's having a referendum and changing the property tax, whether it's just not doing as many roads, whether it's developing a street utility that works maybe a lot like our stormwater utility, wherein one of the things with special assessments that you don't get from property taxes is that tax exempt properties and properties that get significant tax benefits, manufacturing properties, for example, that maybe have a large contribution to the deterioration of a road or traffic on roads. With an assessment, they're helping pay. And some of these other methods, they may as well. And some other methods, they may not. And so, we're looking to compare and contrast what these different methods might look like so that the council, should you wish to change your ordinances and develop a different way of funding these projects, would have a number of options to consider and a full palette of pros and cons, right? So that
I appreciate you sharing that. I guess my fear would be that it seems like quite extensive and may go on for a long time, and I feel like a sense of urgency that I'm not sure this study will, when do you think it'll be done?
Well, I think if we're looking at this scope, we're looking at a few months. And we'll have a
And why
report
does the
back.
same businesses and people get it over and over again? We got $6,000 last year, $8,000 next year. We're old, retired corner people.
So you've got a situation where one street on one side was done and then...
2 blocks. You're gonna do 2 blocks. So we get it on the side of our house
Sure.
now. How do you, why don't you pick a different street, for God's sakes?
That's a good question. How is it determined which street you're gonna do?
So what we do with our street program is we try to develop a 5-year capital improvement program. We try to identify needs where the street is deteriorating or deteriorated or over 40 years old.
Well, there's a lot of streets worse
There
than
are.
ours.
And then what are also the underground...
What street do you live on?
We're on Washington and 11th, and they did
Okay.
Washington last year. They're gonna do 11th, 2 blocks, and we're gonna get it for $8,000 more.
So
I think your study, if you could get information from all the communities in the state as to how they set or how they pay for these improvements, would be helpful.
sure.
And it'd be nice if we could
Yeah,
take
I'm
it
not
off of
saying
our
that
taxes,
that's
for
something
God's
we want to
sakes.
adopt, but we
Right.
could at least find out what other communities do.
In determining the project needs, though, we take a look at the condition. We work with our utilities, our water utility. We look at the wastewater utility needs, the stormwater needs, and the street needs, and we try to identify projects that where those needs are consistent. We try to avoid projects where the water utility has a piece of water main that is at or near end of life, and the wastewater is failing, and the street is close to failing, and if the water utility isn't going to do the project, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to redo the sanitary sewer, rebuild the street, and then 5 years later, the water utility's tearing it up.
Of course not.
Or the wastewater utility. So we're looking at the condition and assessing the condition of the street, but we're also assessing the condition of the underground infrastructure
Of course.
to try to determine what's the best value that we can provide the residents. And in some cases, we've got some water main and some sanitary sewer that's 100 years old. And the street may seem like it's not too bad. It might be a local street and it's been maintained with chip seal over the years, but
that sanitary sewer and that water main is end of life, and it's a serious issue waiting to happen. And these projects get a lot more expensive if they're done reactively versus proactively.
Tom, you signaled that you wanted to speak.
Yeah, it's on the agenda for, discussion and looking into. There's really no action, I guess, we can't say anything. We change it tonight, because that's not part of what the agenda is anyway. I'm in agreement, in fact, that my referral is on Public Works, which is our next meeting, is to review and consider a revision to the Public Works Special Assessment Process and Procedure, and that's really where this is drawn up from and for.
Right.
This has been an ongoing discussion for a number of years. Can we do something different? This is the first time I think we ever got this far. I mean, we just got a piece of paper, nothing's been even given the okay to go anywhere with it. And I understand where the citizens are all coming from, and that's why, again, I put in the referral to see if there's a different way that we can pay for these projects. And to go forward at Public Works, I think we'll have either to approve this or add things to it or subtract from it, put it into motion to have staff, engineering, finance, and all to look into it, study all the ways, because even, you mentioned non-exempt. If we change things in a certain way, non-exempt, we are participating, wouldn't have to. So actually the cost would go up for city residents. So it's to look into, which I'm all in favor of, if there is a way that we can change it, to spread out, because my thoughts have been over many years to spread out the cost more over the city, but what can we legally do, or how can we do it? And this at least would be a start to look into ways of changing it. But that's it. To me, that doesn't, there's no guarantee that it would change for assessments for this year or what, or in past or whatever it's been. If that, it's just, we have to come up with a plan. If there is, we have to come up with a plan. It has to go through and pass by the committees and then council to approve the change. So it would be a number of months, I would think, to come up with something.
For those of you that took the time to come down here tonight, I just would like, our Public Works Director in the paper that he presented us, what he's saying is, instead of doing the special assessment where you get a bill in the mail for $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 or more, he's saying that we have different ways to look at collecting for these projects because they're not directly collected in the property tax, which is, if you've heard of some places where they have a wheel tax, where the municipality tax on $25 or something like that to your vehicle registration, that goes for public improvements, whether it's an increase to property taxes, but as Alderperson Rayom just said, some places are exempted where the special assessments would force them to pay for street improvements. The property taxes wouldn't be collected from those places, so homeowners or other property owners would pick up that cost. Whether we collect through wastewater utility or a separate utility, those options would spread the cost out through the city and get rid of the special assessment. So I guess I would just like to ask you folks that come down here, we have 5 aldermen in this room and 2 directors. I'd just like to ask your opinion. How would you like to see the city, what do you think the direction is for the city to go to collect for special or road repair? I'll start with you, Tim.
I tried to look online like everybody else. I mean, the wheel tax is obviously something that's going on across the state in many communities and municipalities and done through the county, and seems simple enough. I mean, nobody wants to raise their tax, but to me, then you're spreading the joy across the board to everybody that's using the roads. $25 a year, yeah, it doesn't sound great, but I can tell you that those people, if they also knew the alternative was $15,000, they would say, yeah, add $25 to my bill, right? For 20 years, doesn't come close to $15,000 bill or whatever the case might be. The one thing I was thinking while you were talking is, one thing to consider in the study is all the time that staff at the city and all their people are spending having these conversations with people every time a bill goes out. Because I know we're not the first people here to talk about this, and it's going to go on and on.
And that's part of that's part of what's in here is part of that cost is,
instead of doing engineering,
right,
you have people out there talking to people like us because we're complaining.
well, and there's assessment hearings, there's letters that go out, there's procedures, there's post-project work, finance department. Yeah, all of that will be,
And that's
already
I don't know how
part
you
of
figure out that kind of number, but you got to figure out some kind of number that
we track
is time wasted. I don't, as far as how we pay the other ideas for paying these kinds of fees for, I don't know. I mean,
They're the experts.
that's what I was gonna say. It's you got somebody's
I got
hired here by
Tim
the
over
city
here
to
wants
figure
to-
out.
I mean, I think that's exactly what this study is intended to do, is laying out the various options as far as, here's our current practice, here's what we do. That, option number one is do nothing. Option number two is here's the alternatives to, eliminating the special assessments, but still having a revenue source to fund those projects. And then really laying those out, what the implication will be for, say, each resident or business or however that, that revenue source is, and really weighing those pros and cons and looking at the administrative costs. I know one of the things that we're looking at is implementing software to manage the special assessments, and we're holding off on that because we're like, well, I don't want to invest the money in that if we're going to make a change. But I think once the study's done and it lays out all the various options, and people can, all the persons can review it, but people like yourself can get the study, review it, and then obviously we're going to have future meetings where we're going to be discussing it, where your input's going to be valued, and you'll have that study to draw from and kind of say, hey, this is what I think makes sense, from my perspective.
And what's the goal? What's the goal of the city? Put sidewalk in every street in the city?
That's not part of the discussion.
That's not the discussion. This is how we finance whatever projects we approve.
You should have a goal.
And I think, as part of that is Joe's kind of got at it earlier, but also I'd like to include in part of that study is, what is that criteria for how we develop, how we choose our projects? So that's kind of transparent to people, so they know that, this is how, this street got chosen over this street, so we can lay that out so people kind of have a better perspective on how the city makes its decisions on which projects they do in one particular year. So.
Did anyone else have?
I just moved here a couple of years ago, bought a house. If I'd known I was gonna slap with an $8,000 bill, I probably would have bought the house here. So I'm not sure what are my options now.
Well, I am curious as to how the health department looked into it. I mean, did they say, well, we did it last year, let's do it again? Or did they say, we did it last year, there was these conditions, and let's look at other options? And what were the other options that you looked at? I don't know what their thinking process was, but sometimes you get, we did it last year, let's just not mess around with it and do it again. And with people, some people didn't like it, but quite a few did, so I don't know. So it would be good to have them look into different options. And I don't know where those options are. You know what I mean?
What about a motion for the farmer's market, the county who submitted the application, health department, the health department, that committee would like them to look at different options to consider?
Yeah.
You know, different places to consider doing it downtown than closing the streets. So, you know,
I'll second your motion, Tom.
you know how to write that down?
I'll get the video. So basically.
Such, you know, such as
Basically-
parks or other parking lots.
Yeah.
Without,
Traffic patterns.
So is your motion basically to have Wood County come back with alternative ideas for alternative locations? Or
yeah,
is that what, okay.
you second that one? That'll be my motion. Okay.
We have a motion and second on the floor. Is there any other further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, ayes have it. Item number 9 is consider a temporary Class B beer, Class B wine picnic license for Assumption Catholic Schools Incorporated, located at 445 Chestnut Street, for an Assumption Spring musical dinner show to be held on April 2nd, 2020, from 5:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. They have their application that's in order. Was not recommended, denied by the police chief. I would have no problem making a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
We have motion and second. Is there any discussion on the item? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Number 10 is audit of the bills. And this is for our ending check number. I believe it's 2896, 2657 to 2896. Correct? Make a motion to approve the bills, starting check number 2657 to ending check number 2896 as presented.
I'll second it.
We have motion and second. Is there any discussion on the item? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Item number 11 is our beverage operator licenses. There were 3 of them. None have outstanding obligations or were recommended denied by the police chief. I would make a motion to approve the beverage operator licenses.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and second. Is there any other further discussion on the item? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, ayes have it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Not on this item, but for a future meeting. I brought up 2 referrals and they haven't been discussed. One was in September, I asked for a referral with regard to overtime of police during events. And then I brought it up 2 months ago. But we're going to get into a time now where people are going to come for events. And maybe we'll decide as a common council, don't be bothered by it. But then I say to myself, if there's events downtown, that the certain establishments benefit from that, and if there's a overtime, then we in my mind, if you have an establishment on 8th Street and you're not benefiting from it, you're a senior citizen who doesn't go to that event, and you're not taking advantage of it. You could, but the thing is, I think there's something to look at, and just maybe, like I said, maybe we'll say the amount is not worthy of doing it, but in charitable events, I think we should waive it. So I like to look at that. And the other thing I asked for, this was about in the fall, where if we could get a report on the police cameras. We spend quite a bit of money. And well, sometimes I hear where an event takes place in City X and cameras were off or whatever, they didn't work, or what's the policy, what's the practice, what's the training that took place, how are we using them? And and the advantages of them. So it's just that, I think it's a follow-up of an expenditure, and I think it'd be healthy just to know. And at one time, we said, well, we just got them, next time we were in training, next time we haven't used them yet. You know, so now it should be kind of a status, a situation that some type of report could give us a status as to what's happening. Those two I'd like to have on a referral. And they have been referred, so.
I know the special event applications that they were looking at redoing those. There was going to be some legal discussion on it.
Oh, okay.
So that's, but I think it's a good idea to bring it back and see where it's at. So
That's the only two comments I have.
no, that's fine. Our next item was to set our next meeting date, which we've been doing the first Tuesday of the month at 4:45 p.m. So our next regular scheduled meeting will be April 7th, 2020 at 4:45 p.m. And
I'll just make comment, I don't have a problem with it, just so everybody's aware, that'll be, I believe, election day.
yeah, that's right.
But Public Works, we don't have any intent to change theirs, do we?
I guess I never even put any thought to it, that I was actually preparing the next agenda being April 7th.
Okay, it just, it crossed my mind that to be election, so I'm not suggesting we change it, just so we're all aware of it.
Polls don't close till 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Usually, we're almost out of here by 8.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
yeah, okay.
Vote early, vote often.
All right, so we are
Morning, noon, and night.
April 7th of 2020 at 4:45. Just be cognizant that that is election day for the mayor and certain alderman races. And then item number 13 is adjournment. I make a motion to adjourn at 6:07 p.m.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, ayes have it. We stand adjourned.